Hey BSP fans, this is Tim and you're listening to episode 28 of the Black Swamp Podcast. As always, thanks for tuning in. Feel free to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Then throw us a review and some stars if you happen to listen on Apple Podcasts. That always helps boost our exposure and push our little podcast out to more percussion enthusiasts like yourself. I've got a bit to mention before transitioning to our latest interview. We're finishing up details and content for our 2021 Percussion Ensemble Showcase. This year's competition will include modified high school ensemble and college solo divisions, plus a snare drum solo competition. This was introduced last spring after the pandemic shut schools and universities down and proved to be very popular. So we're excited to add that element. We'll be releasing full details the first week of February, so stay tuned for that. Speaking of the pandemic, this interview with Tony Di Sanza was recorded in early December. Since that time, Black Swamp has begun operating with a more complete crew and fuller hours, so thank you for everyone's continued support, including Tony, who has been a longtime friend and supporter of Black Swamp. Actually, going back to the early years when Eric was making tambourines and timpani mallets and stuff out of his garage in Adrian, Michigan. If you want to hear more about that era, check out the 2 BSP Origin Story Episodes we released last year or so, but only after we hear more about Tony. For instance, he just wrapped up a video recording project called Tubes and More. This is with his union duo partner, Todd Hammis. The duo dropped 2 new video releases on YouTube the last 7 weeks. That was 2 videos every week for the last 7 weeks. You'll hear some excerpts of these recordings during the podcast, and we'll drop some links in the show notes. Tony has also been working with Tom Curry and Mark Hessler, fellow University of Wisconsin-Madison colleagues, having released a CD last fall titled Don't Look Down. This is a pretty interesting mix of tuba, trombone, and percussion, what you really wouldn't expect. It includes some electronics, sequencing, and processing, super unique. Again, we'll have links to this project in the show notes, and you'll hear some excerpts throughout the podcast. So let's get started.
Hi there, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Yeah.
Hanging in.
Yeah, that seems to be the response most people have. Right?
Yeah.
Hanging in there, or else. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask how business has been doing.
Business has been going good. It's kind of up and down, to be honest. So we were shut down for like 6 to 8 weeks, kind of starting in March and then going into May. When we first came back, we had a ton of back orders and things we just hadn't gotten to. So we had a pretty busy month and a half or so. And then summer is usually pretty slow for us anyway. So we were anticipating a lull plus the kind of pandemic lull that was impending. So it was kind of up and down. And then, just relatively recently bringing the guys back, Jamel, Eric, and I were working over the summer, and then we kind of gradually bringing the team back. And even now we're all technically part-time. So,
right.
but just kind of doing what we can to get everything out and get everything done. But fortunately, a lot of international business, which has been cool. And then our top kind of dealers in the US have been pretty regular. So we're getting there. Whose podcast is this anyways, Tony? Is this your podcast or mine? Let me just keep talking about myself. We've heard like Sweetwater is doing awesome, and kind of these combo like store shops, online retailers, manufacturers like that are making sticks and mallets and drum heads. We've heard they're doing well, even, basically combo type stuff, because people are finding their old rusty guitars or drum sets in their attics or whatever and deciding, maybe they could do something with it over the summer while they were shut down. So not a lot of people out there rediscovering the orchestral tambourine or our triangles. So, but we're doing well. Yeah, man. Thanks.
Well, hopefully we get to the end of this soon enough,
Yeah. I think, there's obviously a lot of buzz about a couple different vaccines and things like that. So, hopefully we're we're on track to something. So it'd be great.
To something.
Yeah, right. And yeah, how have you been handling the last several months, pandemic era?
Yeah, good. Teaching wise, we're really lucky because we've been able to function pretty much as normal in percussion because we can play with masks and at a distance. So
Right.
what we've done is just make sure none of the chamber groups or the World Percussion Ensemble has any groups that are larger than 4 or 5 players.
Oh, okay, sure.
And we're always rehearsing in big rooms, so we changed where we rehearse to make sure we're always in big spaces.
Yeah.
And then lessons are going on face to face as well in a big room with masks. But so by and large, while the number of performances we have is fewer than normal, we are performing and we are through the streaming alone.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're functioning, and I feel like
Yeah.
we're doing everything we can, and the students are working hard to make this as normal as possible.
Yeah, sure. So when you say you had to find a new space to rehearse in, you had to take over the dance studio, or you had to leave the music building to find somewhere to rehearse and stuff?
Luckily, we just last October opened a new building in school.
Oh,
music.
okay.
And so usually we rehearse in the original building, in the percussion studio, and another room simultaneously. Right. The percussion studio is pretty big, but not big. I wasn't comfortable with 5 people in that room.
Yeah.
Even with masks. So we just moved, some of the bigger spaces, and, the brass players, the woodwind players, they're doing almost everything online.
Yeah, sure.
So it has opened up those spaces for us that we kind of feel like we have a run of the building right now.
Right. Taking over the percussion department's taken over. Yeah, it's awesome. I guess because I was there several years ago to visit. So you guys have moved into a new facility since then.
Well, we took the concert halls that were in the building you were familiar with,
right?
And we built new concert halls. So my studio is in the same space, and our practice facilities are the same. But we have 2 new concert halls and a new rehearsal hall with all kinds of new gear.
Yeah, great.
Right next door in the new building.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes I've kind of been asking people, like, I mean, obviously it's been a struggle, but you're adapting, like, as far as the education side goes, but like personally, is there, how are you doing? Is anything kind of new developed? Sometimes I ask about creativity or like something kind of new that's happened, maybe a silver lining out there, or like either your own playing, your teaching, or family wise, stuff like that. Like,
yeah, the as far as my own sort of creative output, I was really lucky that when the pandemic hit, I had just finished about a year and a half of time in the studio recording solo and chamber works.
Right.
And they were all in unedited raw form. Well, all of that work I can do in my basement on my own, and then communicate with my audio engineer and the recording engineer. So I was able to use the sort of shift in emphasis that the pandemic brought in the spring to say, okay, I'm not playing orchestra, in the orchestra, we're not doing this. All of a sudden I've got a lot more time to manage editing. And so from the spring through the summer has been about editing what was already recorded, both for the Don't Look Down CD and for some of the duo and personal stuff.
Right.
And I've still got quite a bit of stuff in the can that I've got to get to. So I got a couple months yet of that sort of work ahead.
And that's all done you said at home in your own personal space, or are you kind of go into school to work on some of that stuff, or that's all your own?
I do almost all of my own practicing and work at home. I have a basement studio, which I'm thrilled about. It leaves the studio on campus open for the students to use.
Yeah, sure.
And I prefer to work at home than in the institution.
Yeah.
And then for the recording stuff, I was also going into the recording studio, and Buzz Kemper, who is the audio engineer for a number of the projects I'm involved with right now, we would just set up where when we were working through the edits, I'd already listened to stuff and chosen what I wanted to do. So we're doing the editing together. I'm in one room, he's in another. In the recording studio, so that we didn't have to be too close to each other while we're doing that editing work.
Sure. Cool.
It's all basement in the recording studio.
Yeah. I mean, I've mentioned this several times on this podcast. Like, I bought mics like drum mics and stuff like before, like last November. And so I was able to kind of get some recording gear going, like figure out how to use uh, GarageBand. I'll be totally honest.
Right.
Like,
I'm trying to get more to Audacity now as another free one, but yeah, that stuff's totally useful.
Yeah. And just kind of figure out how to mic drums, how to get, rid of some of the, how to tune my drums, one, to like get the best sounds from them, and then how to mic them, kind of mic placement and stuff like that. And I started doing a couple of projects through like church, of course everybody's like racing to figure out how we're gonna like do some virtual stuff. So we were trying to put together some, things like that. My brother-in-law is a guitar player, so we were kind of collaborating on something a little bit. And then as I kind of got, we started going back to work a little bit more, and I started doing more of that. It's kind of tapered off, but so I don't know, it's something I've always kind of wanted to do. And we do all that in-house. Like, so Jamel's kind of our audio engineer, and mixing and mastering, does all the recording of everything we do in-house. And then I do a lot of video work with Nathan's help.
Lost you a little bit.
What's that?
We just skipped. We had a Zoom skip. We're okay.
Oh yeah, cool. Better you than me. I'm getting lucky right now. I'm in the basement and kind of far away from our router, and then my daughter's at home right now, both of them, like online virtual learning. So my fingers are crossed that we don't have any issues. But so yeah, I was trying to like explore some of that, like recording and stuff I kind of want to do. So I'm all set up for it now. So all these projects, I'm sure, will just come flooding in. They'll just come rolling in any day. I'll do all these drum set recording gigs and stuff. But
it is nice though to have this time that, so often when we're in our crazy lives, it's like, man, if I had an extra hour,
sure,
I'd love to spend a little time with this sound or do this, but I don't. And we do have some of that time now, and for the wrong reasons, but it is nice to be able to sort of redirect some of that energy a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of what I really wanted to do was, are you familiar with Adam Hopper? Like, he's one of our kind of concert artists, and he's done like, he'll build tracks, kind of like sequence tracks and stuff like that, and then play along stuff. He's written some compositions. So I was just kind of, the direction I was going was kind of maybe building some sequences, things that I could play along with, just like practice stuff. But as soon as I started recording, I realized I had a couple other deficiencies, stuff that I used to yell at my own students about, just like, time, rushing through fills and things like that. So okay, now I got to go back to some basics, I think. And that's like playing with the metronome, things like that. But that's cool.
That's never ending, is it?
Right. Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad it's like you still experience some of those problems and issues.
Yeah, every day.
So let's just go back in time a little bit, and if you could give us like a kind of an overview of how you got started, maybe a catalyst for getting started in percussion, or how that developed, and kind of a quick bird's eye view of where you got to where you are now, or how you got to where you are now.
Sure. I started out as a French horn player.
Okay. That's new. I've never heard that one before.
Who says that?
Yeah, no kidding.
And I remember distinctly being in 4th or 5th grade when we got to choose instruments. And there are no musicians in my family whatsoever, so there's no line of that. Yeah. And I just thought the French horn looked really cool with all the little circular tubing.
Yeah.
And so I chose the instrument because it looked neat. And enjoyed it, but by 8th grade decided I moved over to percussion.
Yeah.
And I was, until the middle of 9th grade, I was the world's worst band student in junior high at the time. It was junior high. I was the typical percussionist in the back, just causing troubles. Adam Shangris, who was our band director, I'm sure had nothing but absolute frustration with me and the whole section. Yeah. And the story I generally tell about this, at least for me, is that I actually had an epiphanal moment in my life. And I we all may occasionally experience these. This has possibly been the strongest one I ever had, and was during a concert in 9th grade. And I actually remember I was playing timpani on Frank Erickson's Blue Ridge Overture, a classic, 80s, 90s middle school band piece. Yeah. And all of a sudden I realized playing this piece, this is the coolest thing ever. I
that's
really,
cool.
really love this. And everything changed for me on a dime. Within a month later, the band director was saying, "Oh my God, what happened to you?"
Yeah.
And then I won the most improved band member award at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And then from there, it was just, and by the next year, I knew I wanted to go into music. So the early on, it was really pivoting around one place that I just sort of realized what I was loving.
Do you remember what it was about Blue Ridge Mountain that kind of attracted you to that?
To the piece, nothing specific other than I realized how much I liked it.
Yeah,
I think that was a moment of, wow, this is actually really, really something that is meaningful to me. And I think it was probably the first time in my life, in ninth grade, that anything actually mattered to me.
Yeah.
I just wasn't that interested specifically in things before that.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool. I honestly, like you say, you have an epiphanal moment, epiphanal moment.
I think so. Yes.
And I don't know. That's totally what I'm looking for. Like when I ask kind of people that question, because I think that's really interesting that music and a specific piece of music that you remember kind of had that effect on you. And I mean, at the time, when I picked up music, and like a lot of us in fifth grade, I have long arms. This is still a running joke in my house, by the way. I have long arms. So the band director at the time, Mr. Bazzani, wanted me to play trombone. And I was like, well, and my sister was in March. She's 5 years older. She was in band. Probably not the most exemplary band student, but sorry, Jennifer. But she was in band. So I kind of had, she's 5 years older. So I had seen, wind ensemble, I'd seen marching band, and I'd kind of had an opportunity to investigate some of these different sections. And by that time, I knew I kind of wanted to play drums and I wanted to play music. And so I was like, no, I'm not playing trombone. I don't care how long my arms are, but I want to be a drummer and percussionist. And honestly, I mean, I don't have like an epiphanal kind of story or like some specific event other than, well, I did hear the drum line and they were playing a cadence, and I thought that was like the coolest thing. So I do kind of remember that sticks out, but I know what you mean. Like nothing else. I mean, I tried sports, I was academic in a sense. Like I got, decent grades. I didn't, like most teachers told me I didn't apply myself or whatever, but music was like the first thing that like kind of made sense to me. And like, I had to work at, but I found myself improving and I got better, where like, I could sit out in the driveway and try to shoot hoops all day. And I just, I wasn't, it just didn't happen, So, no, I think it's cool. And like kind of gave you those first thing, like you saw some purpose or gave you some direction, and I can relate definitely. So
yeah, it was an instant change for me. Everybody, all of the adults in my life noticed it immediately.
Yeah,
it was very interesting.
Yeah, cool. No, that's great. So where'd you go from there then, out of high school?
Yeah, went to Youngstown State for my undergrad. I actually ended up at Youngstown in Ohio. I grew up outside of Cleveland, on the far east side of Cleveland, what we'd call today the exurbs.
Yeah.
And then ended up at Youngstown because they had a great jazz program, still do.
Yeah.
And when I came out of high school, I was going to be a New York jazz drum set player. Because that's what everybody does, and there's all kinds of gigs, and you can make a living there.
Yeah. Just like I'm going to be a recording artist, in the next
I'm just going to jump right in. Yeah,
right.
They're just waiting for us to show up. Yeah. So I chose my undergrad because of the jazz program, but then I realized about 2 years in that my interests were actually more in the contemporary side of percussion and the classical side of percussion, and equal as important, my abilities. I felt like we're stronger there. So luckily my interests and my abilities aligned. And so I gradually kind of got out of the jazz scene in undergrad and doing much more of the other side of things.
Right.
Then ended up, went to University of Michigan for my master's. That was around 90 or 91.
Okay.
Studied with Mike Udow as my primary mentor, who is still my dear friend and someone with whom I work regularly, and also the person that I attribute whatever career I have is due to what Michael taught me and the opportunities he afforded me.
Yeah.
So then did 2 years, and then was out for 2 years teaching public school, because my undergraduate was in music education.
Right.
And I took time between each degree and taught in the public schools. So after the master's, taught 2 years in the public schools, and then went back for the DMA back to Ann Arbor to be with Mike one more time. And I also studied with Sal Rabbio on timpani, was my other primary teacher, and Julie Spencer was in town during my master's. So studied some marimba with Julie as well. Yeah, and then from there was finishing my second year of the DMA, and had the opportunity to go to Kansas State and start my college teaching career.
So, and what people might not know is you have a pretty long history with Black Swamp too, because I know you when you were, and this is my question, I guess, like when did that kind of, I mean, you were going to U of M and I think playing in kind of on the East Michigan side. And is that how you initially met Eric at sort of those early Black Swamp years? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I met Eric as we were both doing the Michigan orchestra circuit.
Oh, okay. Yeah, cool.
And I can't remember if it was at Flint Symphony or I don't think I played Lansing that often. I think Eric might have been playing Lansing at the time, but I was doing Flint, Sheboygan, and I think Jackson.
Whoa. Sheboygan has an orchestra?
Oh, wait, no, Sheboygan. That's Sheboygan. That's Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, there's another area.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we met doing those gigs, and I still have some Black Swamp bass drum mallets.
Oh, wow.
That Eric was making in the early years that I purchased from him. They're on bamboo.
Yeah.
I still use them regularly, and so and Eric at the time was just starting the company, and I remember buying some stuff from him because he was making out of the garage, those early times, and then just kind of continued the relationship from there.
No, that's funny. Well, those bamboo bass drum mallets, I have some for like posterity, sort of in my my stick bags and stuff like that. Like, so yeah, those never really got off the ground, or we didn't pursue it. I think largely because he started doing timpani mallets, and then we never really pursued the bass drum mallets. But so, and
I feel like I own almost like one of a kind.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, yeah, people, if you guys see any Black Swamp bass drum mallets out there, hold on to them, because I'm sure they'll be worth a fortune one day.
Big dollars.
But I do these, sometimes I call them petting zoos, or like when I came to Madison and did like a show and tell and stuff and a slideshow. And part of that is a little history of BSP, and that, I got pictures of Eric in his garage in Adrian, Michigan, kind of that early mid 90s era, kind of, and when he got started. So yeah, it's kind of cool to see or hear that you were almost in on the ground floor also, and kind of it got kind of
only because we were occasionally gigging together and bought some stuff.
Yeah, no, but that's great. I mean, that's how it starts. I mean, back then there was no Facebook, sometimes I was doing just a recent Zoom kind of clinic thing, talking about the company with Tim Adams and his studio down in Georgia. And somebody asked, like, how did you market before Facebook? It was like, okay, yeah, that's actually a really good question. Cause we didn't, back then it was a lot of word of mouth and just kind of talking to players and talking to people and going to conventions, going to PASIC and stuff like that. And then getting in the Steve Weiss music catalog, was like a big step. So, so I appreciate you kind of getting behind the project even then, and kind of having a relationship with Eric. Super cool. So
yeah, it was really fun to see. It's Eric, and we had not met until we started, just occasionally doing those gigs together.
Yeah.
But it was really neat to see from those, seeing him do some of those early work to where the company has gone is remarkable in my estimation.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, so that you went to Kansas City? Is that right?
To Manhattan, Kansas.
Oh,
so
okay.
Kansas State University.
Kansas State, okay.
Yeah, so I had finished, I was in my second year of DMA. So when I left Michigan to take the gig at Kansas State, I wasn't even done with my classwork yet.
Oh, okay.
So I still had one theory course to take, which I did at a distance. And this is, now we talk about at a distance. Great, we turn on Zoom. It meant writing letters to Andy Mead, who was guiding me through the class. It was and trying to do all of that, and then also take my prelims and my comprehensive exams and do my recitals while I was in my first teaching gig.
Yeah.
which had me running the percussion studio, the marching band, drumline, the concert band, and a music theory course.
Yeah.
In
Wow.
that first year. And luckily I was really young, so I had the energy, but it was a great gig. And I remember when I was offered the job, I was asking different faculty in Ann Arbor, friends and faculty, what should I stay on, or should I take the job?
Right.
And the unanimous consensus is it's a university teaching job. You run, you don't walk there. Right. You go, you take the job, and then you deal with whatever you have to deal with for the degree.
Yeah.
And it took me another 4 or 5 years to finish the degree.
Okay.
Because I was working full time, but that was fine, and it was really a great opportunity.
One thing I did want to talk about, which will tie into some of the projects that you have going on now, and you mentioned moving from drum set to kind of more contemporary percussion, but you also have a large background in quote unquote like world music or non-Western music. Like, how did that begin to take shape? Is that when you were at U of M, like studying with Michael Udow, or kind of later on in your own personal projects or studies?
Yeah, I came at global music really quite backwards. Okay. Because my first experiences in it were playing darbuka, Middle Eastern goblet drum. Right. And I started playing it because I was doing what was that for? Oh, it was for Mike and I were playing, when I started the master's degree is when I also got the opportunity to work with the Michigan Chamber Players. Okay. And those in the early 90s, there were a number of tours with Keiko Abe and the Michigan Chamber Players, right, which were Mike Udow, Harry Sargis on oboe, Don Cinta saxophone, and then myself as playing second percussion. And one of the pieces Mike had composed for that group, he wanted something timekeeping on a hand drum. He had nothing in particular in mind. And I remember finding the old Doombeck that the percussion studio had sitting on a shelf, and I started playing it. And then I found a couple videos, old VHS videos in the library, and checked those out. So why I say my introduction into the music
you had to go to a library and get a VHS tape.
That's right.
Also another era.
Another era indeed. Right. But at least it wasn't a reel. So that's
okay.
Good.
Even I'm not sure what those are. But go ahead. Okay, so you went to the library. You started studying some Doombeck.
Yeah. So but I learned the drum backwards in that I didn't learn it through the traditions. I learned it as a sound source first.
Yeah, sure.
And then went back, and that was only out of sort of naivete and lack of understanding of maybe a better and more respectful way to engage in another culture's music. Yeah. So I started playing the drum that way, and got as many resources as I could at that time. But it was very much me just improvising on the instrument. Though I will say the instrument felt good in my hands from the beginning. It felt comfortable. And so that was in like 92 or 3-ish. When I moved to Madison in 99, the first percussionist I met when I moved here, his name's Robert Scoville. Robert's still a dear friend 20 some years later. Robert now lives with his wife in Turkey. But at the time, he was a gigging musician here in Madison who had been studying Middle Eastern drumming and Brazilian drumming, and whose roommate was an oud and saz player from Middle Eastern music. So all of a sudden, it was like, oh my gosh, I just moved into a community where I get to play with other people and start to really learn about the music from its core. Robert had been studying with his teacher in Milwaukee. And so Robert and I started traveling to Milwaukee to study with Hamid Awan, who's our teacher there. Hamid's now retired, but still lives in the Milwaukee area. Hamid grew up in Baghdad and had immigrated to the US in the 80s to study engineering, was also a drummer, and then ultimately owned an import store in downtown Milwaukee, and then he taught lessons in his basement. He also built drums. He had a kiln.
Okay.
And so it really wasn't until I moved to Madison that I was able to start really studying and really understanding, not even start able to, but understanding how to study music of others.
Yeah.
And Robert had also just returned from his first trip to Brazil.
Okay.
And that was sort of the door opening to my interest in Brazilian music as well. So yeah, those interests started in a backward way. And then I got really lucky in moving to Madison to finding a community immediately within which I could start studying and learning. Robert was ahead of me in all of these musics, especially understanding them culturally.
Yeah.
And still is, but so it was nice to be able to find a colleague that I could study with, and then ultimately go on about, doing study trips and expanding my study circle.
Yeah. Well, I think what stuck out to me is you mentioning to be sort of respectful to the instrument and to the culture in which it comes from. And is that something you talk to your students about if they're kind of like looking into playing global music or kind of looking to study or explore that? Is that something you guys discuss?
Yeah, a ton actually, because the students, almost all of them also engage throughout their degree process in the World Percussion Ensemble in the studio. That group, based on the 3 faculty members that teach in that group, what we do is based on our, the skills we have.
Right.
Nobody in the group really deeply knows traditional Japanese drumming, so we don't do that sort of playing, but we do a lot of Brazilian playing, some Cuban playing, a lot of Middle Eastern, and some Indian.
Yeah.
And again, that's because of the skills of the faculty. And while the students are engaging in that, all of those classes are taught in the way, by and large, they were taught to us. So it's all through the oral tradition.
Right.
We really don't, in the World Percussion Ensemble, very rarely give students print or notational material. We record rehearsals, and then they're posted so that they can then reference and remember. And then if they want to transcribe and write things down, that's great. My transcriptions.
Sure.
Because the process of transcribing and digging through is a part, in my estimation, of learning the music, because that's also how it's taught.
Yeah, by rote. Yeah.
Exactly, in the oral tradition, by rote. So we talk about a great deal, trying to be so careful that we're not appropriating culture.
Yeah, sure.
For our own benefit.
Yeah. So when you said Darabuka, what stuck out to me is you have a concerto for Darabuka. Is that with orchestra also, or is it another? Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. There's 2 of them now. They're both for percussion. They're both for percussion group.
Oh, okay.
So the first one, which is just called Concerto for Darabuka, I think. It's been 15 years now. It's percussion quartet, and then in 2013 I composed a second one, which is for percussion trio and soloist.
Yeah, and
that was for a group I'm playing with.
Okay, so and that was that kind of part of your exploration with the instrument, or you're like, okay, now I have a handle on this, I can compose something or write something that's kind of appropriate, or was that kind of part of your also learning process, I guess, like with the first concerto?
Yeah, I think all of the above. Because I would still not say that, every time I compose for those instruments, I'm just trying to be super careful that I'm coming from a place of respect and integrity for the folks from which those that gave the knowledge and the experiences to me. So each of those, the concerto compositions or anything else, I do feel like I got to a point where I could start to write some stuff, and it took me quite a while to get to that point. But I still feel like the act of writing that stuff is part of my studies of it as well.
Yeah, cool. So you're in Madison. Well, you got to Madison in 99, I think you said.
99,
yeah. So it's, wow. I'll let you do the math later. I'll let our listeners do the math later. So
too long.
Well, no, yeah. I mean, that's the time I started at Black Swamp, basically. 97 when I started working part-time for Eric. By that time, he had moved from kind of the Adrian area to West Michigan, where we are now. And working part-time, going to school, stuff like that, but I started working full-time in 2000. So yeah,
Right.
it's like mind-bending. Like,
It's amazing how quickly those
yeah,
20 years fly. That's why when I say it's too long, just meaning I feel like I'm getting too old. It's so fast.
Right. So let's talk about the projects you got going on. One is, well, you mentioned earlier the Don't Look Down CD. With it's a trio. So Curry, Hetzler, and Di Sanza is the name of the project, or maybe it's called the Curry, Hetzler, Di Sanza project.
No, just Curry, Hetzler, and Di Sanza is the group for the
okay,
band.
yeah,
That's right.
And the latest CD is Don't Look Down. And what's super cool about this is, and this is kind of the third part, there's contemporary percussion, global music, and then electronics. Like, this sort of ties it somewhat together, if I'm understanding correctly and listening to the CD. So it's for trombone, tuba, and percussion, and then electronics. Like, do you talk about all of that?
Sure.
like basically how this project developed, and then how you guys are, because it is an interesting combination of instruments, but it works, like, and it's super cool.
Yeah, and if you listen to portions of it, you'd never guess that it's trombone, tuba, and percussion because of all of the electronics involved. The project started in, I think it was 2018, in like November, maybe 2017, November, December. Tom Curry and Mark Hetzler are both colleagues of mine on the faculty at UW-Madison. Tom is professor of tuba, and Mark is the professor of trombone. I've worked with both of them a great deal in the past. We've always had a great relationship, whether it be just working with Tom directly or working with Mark directly. Mark and I have recorded a number of classical CDs together, or his projects that I was involved with. But they both, like me, like to engage in composition and to push envelopes and break down silos between sort of genres.
Yeah.
And they had come to me and said, listen, we've got this performance at the end of January, and Tom and I have a piece for this evening length piece, this 60-minute work that we're just putting together. Would you join us? And but they had all they could do was describe at that point what was in their heads, because there was nothing yet happening as far as audio material. But knowing how close we all are, I said, "Oh yeah, I'm in. Let's see what we do." And knowing that what they were really looking for was not necessarily as much keyboard percussion, but sort of drumming sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff that could fill in their melodic and sonorous gaps. And so they rehearsed, they all of the compositions, the Don't Look Down as a recording sits as one piece with 11 movements. So they composed the concepts or the specific notes for the movements, and then I composed all of the percussion parts, because what they did was they rehearsed a couple times, and they recorded their rehearsals and said, oh, here's some framework of what we're doing. I spent about a week listening and putting together some ideas on what I might play with them.
Yeah.
And then we got together for 2 or 3 rehearsals, and we just experimented and started to try to shape things. And then we did our first performance of the piece. And it's a big deal when that group sets up, because it's a ton of electronics. So it's a full sound system. There's a lot of sequencing going on and triggering of sequencing live.
Yeah.
So the first performance we put together, and then we went back to the workshop on it and rebuilt it again.
Yeah.
And then about 6 months later, took it out on tour and did a bunch of performances, and then went into the studio. I went into the studio December 2019, recording my parts. We had everything recorded just before the pandemic hit. Yeah. Which was amazing, because then it's all in the can, and now it's great. We can do the editing, at a distance and all that.
Yeah, flipped out.
Yeah.
So a couple questions. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was like, where do you perform? Like, the pieces, like, is that like kind of university-based stuff, or out within Madison? Or you mentioned going on tour. Like, what are the venues like for a performance like this?
Yeah, the venues we've done a lot of universities. The tour we did last February,
Okay.
which was, wait, was that right? No, I'm sorry, that was a different November. We toured in November, then I started recording in December.
Yeah.
That was almost all universities. It was really fun. We were out for 7 days, and we did 6 gigs in 7 days, which was really fun because we also did some master classes, and so it was like get in, set up, play. The next morning, do a master class, get in the car, load up, drive, so it was a lot of, and it was really nice because the totality of the Don't Look Down composition as a whole, there's a ton of improvisation.
Okay.
So even each night, it feels a little different, even though the structure is always the same.
So this kind of leads to my second question, which is the electronics portion of it. And you mentioned sequencing. I mean, is there live sequencing? Is there also live processing, like manipulation of sounds and things? So how do you kind of balance that with the improvisation? Like how's that pieced together? Or
wonderfully. I say this wonderfully because I'm not great with the technology. Everything I'm playing is acoustic.
Okay.
So all of the percussion sounds are live sounds. So all of the triggering, processing, and all of that is coming from trombone and tuba setups.
Yeah.
Mark Hetzler, the trombone player, has a pedal board that he has built, which has about 30 effects pedals built on it, as a guitarist would use.
Yeah, cool.
He uses a wireless mic that he attaches to the bell of the trombone. So when he wants to run acoustic, of course, the mic is just amplifying.
Yeah.
But then he routes his signal through all of his technology, and he's totally live on the spot processing his sounds. So he does his through the pedal boards, where the work that Tom does from tuba, he's also doing a lot of live processing, but his is through Ableton and through applications.
I see.
So there are 2 different routes, but a lot of the same results as far as the live processing.
Yeah, and then you mentioned all the percussion is just like acoustic. There's no processing or sequencing or looping or anything like that on the percussion stuff.
No, that's correct. I'm generally playing with any loops that have been created if there are loops going on. So I'm not creating those.
Is there any live, not live, is there any, live recordings, like where people can see or watch or?
We don't have a video. That's our next project is to get a video recording.
Yeah.
We're not really releasing those now, the CDs, because that's sort of for us the most mature realization of it.
Yeah. Cool.
So, but we are working on a video because it is kind of fun to watch them, especially those 2 guys go through all the technology they're managing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be cool to kind of see, and then especially, I mean, you're talking about setup and instrumentation, and then be able to kind of witness how everything comes together. It would be pretty interesting.
If I could interject, one other thing for me that's really been fun about that project,
yeah, for sure,
is I mentioned all those years ago that it was drum set that took me to college.
Yeah,
and that was my primary interest, and then it moved over to percussion. I play a decent amount of drum set in this group.
Oh, interesting.
But because I don't consider myself to be really a drum set player any longer, I try to approach the set much more like except in one tune where it's really time-keeping drum set playing, more as a multi-instrument that I happen to be sitting at. So the drum set is a number of cymbals, a kick drum, 1 tom, and 1 snare.
Yeah.
Purposely set up to move me away from any drum setty things I might normally try to hack my way through.
I don't know why I just thought of this, but I know like old Peter Gabriel stuff, like basically like I mean, what I'm thinking is you're just trying to get yourself out of those habits, or like get yourself out of like what you normally might do. I mean, I was never there, but I know when like Peter Gabriel did earlier recordings, he wanted stuff without cymbals, or he
Mm-hmm.
wanted like kind of like just basically to kind of push the drummer or percussionist, whoever it was, Jerry Marotta, whoever, like to do
Mm-hmm.
something out of the ordinary, do something they wouldn't normally do. So I think that's pretty cool.
You know, that's interesting because I heard a similar story with King Crimson,
Oh yeah,
where
sure.
Robert Fripp, and it was I'm trying to remember the drummer's name, who was in the early 90s on Beat, Three of a Perfect Pair, and Discipline. His name will come to me. We all know him.
Yeah.
But Fripp told him, he said, oh, let's go without any cymbals in this recording.
Yeah.
And he did it all on, so it was a whole different bag. Yeah.
Mastelato? Pat? Was it Pat?
Oh,
it's okay.
It'll come to me as we're talking, because it's embarrassing. I don't know, because he's one of my favorite drummers in the world.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about too, but Google it.
I'm going to. As we
I know.
talk.
I saw you pick up your phone. I think he used to play for Yes too. And Eric and I have an argument. I'm a kind of an Alan White fan, kind of that era of Yes, and I think he's more of a fan of the drummer that you're looking up right now. I'm
this very minute
drawing a blank too, but so while you're finding that, there's another project you're involved in, Curry Hetzler. Sorry, no, that's what we just talked about.
That's what we're just talking about.
Yeah,
right?
Sorry, Tubes and More. I'm just scrolling down my notes here.
Yeah,
Todd Hames, I think his name is.
Hamas is
sorry.
Hamas.
Yeah.
Bill Bruford, by the way.
Bill Bruford. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. How could we be searching for freaking Bill Bruford's name? My God. Right. Yeah. But yeah, the Tubes and More. Todd and I started. Todd is also a colleague. Is one of our adjunct percussion faculty. Has been in Madison. Moved here in the mid 2000s with his wife from Arizona. He'd been playing in the Tucson Symphony for like 20 years. We played together a lot over the years. He's also an improvising musician, and we play in the orchestra together a little bit, and then he also we do some of these sorts of projects together. Yeah. One of his strengths amongst his great diversity is he's a tabla player, he's a jazz vibraphone player, drum set player, orchestral player, but also an improviser, both in jazz, the style of jazz, but also in a-stylistic or more free improvisation.
Yeah.
So, we've played together in those settings a long time, and we both have a strong interest in global music as well. So we just started talking, well, why don't we start composing some music for ourselves?
Yeah.
And formalize what we've done occasionally in the past. And so that's where Union Duo came from. And it's actually a pretty new project. We've only been working it about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And it's a combination of some pieces I wrote, some improvisations, some conceptual pieces that he brought to us. And then also part of the video series is also a piece by Lou Harrison that we've taken a new twist on.
Yeah.
But the duo focuses right now on globally influenced percussion. So there's we're each bringing our own sort of skills to it and creating music around sort of the amalgamation that has been our lives.
Yeah. Cool.
And if I just say the video release project that actually started today.
Yeah, well, that's what I wanted to bring up. Like today's the 7th, and I know like that's when it was launching on YouTube, and you guys are doing like 14 videos released on YouTube over the next 7 weeks, I think. So kind of 2 videos a week. Can you talk about that, like what the concept is and how you guys developed that project?
Yeah, and the concept of the video release came a little later. We had done these recordings not the summer of 2020, but the summer of 2019.
Yeah,
and that's what we kind of got to when the pandemic hit. It's like, oh, great, now we have time to do all these editings. Right. So we had, over the course of about a week, recorded 2 pieces of mine, 3 versions of the Harrison, and then a series of pieces that we call music with tubes. This was Todd's concept he had built a tubaphone
Okay.
based on Lou Harrison's American Gamelan. And the tubes are pentatonic and tuned in just intonation, so that they're very sonorous because they're tuned using only the overtones and not tuned using like equal temperament that we'd see on a marimba or a piano, that are not perfectly sonorous but allow us to divide the octave into 12 parts. When you tune in just intonation, you're tuning only based on the overtones, and you get very sonorous sounding intervals.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is you can't play in all 12 keys when you're tuning in just intonation. But in this case, Harrison wasn't looking to do that because he was taking the idea from Indonesian gamelan and built the American gamelan.
Yeah.
So Todd and his father, who used to own a tool and die company, they built these tubes, tuned them via just intonation, so they're really beautiful sounding. And the tubes he used are high pressure water tubes that are used in high-rise buildings. I had no idea that this was a thing, but he said, they're special tubes because I guess water pressure on the 50th floor is different than on the first floor. I don't know the physics of all this.
It makes sense. I guess it's got to travel further. So yeah,
that's right. I'll take Todd's word for it. So they are a unique tube. And those are the tubes that are used on the Harrison. And then his idea was to create a series of improvisations using that as well as other instruments that you see on the videos.
Yeah.
And in the studio, we just improvised for about 2 hours. We created shorts.
Yeah.
Improvising pieces from 2 minutes to 4 minutes long. Yeah. And then we went through and we chose the ones we really liked, and we created a series of 7 of those, Music with Tubes, and they each have their independent titles. Music with Tubes, Patient, or Music with Tubes, Ragtime, or whatever we decided to call them.
Yeah.
And then for the video release project, since there's 7 of those, we're pairing one of those each week with one of these other pieces. Either there's 2 other duo pieces, or actually 5 other duo pieces, including the Harrison. And then we're including one solo performance of mine by Per Norgard,
right.
Energy Fields Forever. And then there's the 14, we have 13 videos, and then there's a 14th video, which is a bonus at the end, which we'll unveil on the 14th week.
Right.
So yeah, the idea of releasing 7 weeks of videos wasn't where the project started.
Yeah.
That was sort of how we realized all of the work we had started to do and try to figure out a way to package it and get it out there in a way that was interesting.
No, I think like packaging it is like what I was trying to think of in my head. Like how can because the same type of things happen when we're not in the office improvising, performing, and recording music, but we're coming up with products, we're coming up with marketing and things like that. And sometimes I fully admit, sometimes I put the cart before the horse a little bit. It's like, I got to think, okay, how are we going to present this? How are we going to package it? How are we going to put together? And sometimes it's kind of revealed over time. Like we start, like Nathan and I, we'll start working on some video content or some marketing ideas and things. And like, okay, how we're actually going to present this is revealed over time as it begins to take shape. So it's kind of interesting to hear that in more of a musical context, but,
and Todd and I are both in our mid 50s. So for us, social media is not our best suit. So
I didn't want to embarrass you, but I was going to ask you, like, so who's kind of spearheading the social media aspect of it, or the YouTube kind of release and schedule and things like that?
I'm managing most of that, but it's in conjunction. I've worked a lot with our publicity person in the School of Music.
Okay, cool.
Eric Murtaugh is his name. He's been super helpful. Eric's fairly new. He's been with us maybe in his position maybe 6 or 8 months.
Okay.
But of course, Eric's younger, and anybody in that sort of job now has to know social media. So so he's been helpful in helping us sort of figure out how to do this. And I haven't finished my Facebook post this morning.
Right.
Of okay, the first week's out. I sent a whole bunch of emails, but I didn't get the Facebook post because I'm trying to figure out how to get 2 videos in one post on Facebook, and I'm not sure I can do it.
I'll be honest, I don't think you can, but I don't know. I would ask the guy there at in Madison. He'll probably tell you.
And the students are also helpful as well.
No, that's awesome. That's cool to hear. Yeah, Nathan, I mean, I call him a kid, but he's in his mid 20s, and he handles 99% of the social media. Like, I pretty much have passed all those reins off to him. And yeah, I mean, being born into it is just like part of his language. And he does an awesome job kind of scheduling and curating posts and doing all of that stuff. So I feel you.
And that's a full-time job managing that. I mean, if you're going to be on a number of different platforms, that's a lot of work to manage for a business or for an artist. It's huge.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he spends a fair amount of time, 10, 12, 15 hours a week. I mean, he's like all of us. I mean, he's kind of part-time now. So he splits time at home, basically doing all the social media stuff. You're exactly right. I mean, Facebook and Instagram are kind of our big two, and the YouTube, all of our video content goes out on YouTube because we know people actually research products and want to listen to stuff on YouTube. So he manages kind of all of that, and voices are different. So maybe, and voice, I mean, like not our actual speaking voice, but like what the words that we're using, like the content is different on Facebook than it might be on Instagram or even Twitter. We're not super active on Twitter. Snapchat, we don't have a Snapchat account yet. Maybe you need a Tubes and More Snapchat account. But yeah, I mean, it's a fair amount of work to kind of keep up on it, but he enjoys it. It's kind of his wheelhouse. So I, as my wife says, I get under his piñata, like, so he gets excited about it, and he does a really good job. So I appreciate the hard work that he puts into it. And so there's a couple other things I want to talk to you about before I let you go, so you can finish your Facebook post. Is the one, and this is two things maybe I didn't email you about in advance, but there's one thread that's come through all of our conversation, which is improvisation. And I've had conversations with a couple other people on the podcast, like Gloria Yahalevsky, Anthony Di Bartolo, a couple other people that are really exploring improvisation and kind of what that means to them. MB Gordy recently, talking about improvisation, even in the movie and film, television scores that he does. Like, kind of what does improvisation mean to you in these different projects you're exploring, playing more global music or contemporary kind of percussion stuff? So when you're talking with Tubes and More, you guys go in and just record and improvise. Like, how is that structured, or how are you working through that?
For me, improvisation, I remember going back to high school, sitting in a dark practice room in the music facility and just playing piano, not really realizing what I was doing, but just enjoying the sonorities and the creation of music spontaneously.
Yeah, sure.
And then in undergrad school, we had a band together called the Outboard Motors, and it was a free improv bar band.
Okay.
So we'd play 4-hour gigs of complete improvisation, typical band, sort of guitar, bass, keyboards, couple percussionists. So for me, the improvisation has always been a big part of my life and something I really enjoy doing.
Yeah. Cool.
And when I left graduate studies, when I left Ann Arbor to go to Kansas, there was no one really around, and I'm not a jazz improviser. So, I don't have that outlet. So my improvisation is more on the free side. Yeah. Then it was like 10 years I didn't really get to improvise much with other people, because when I was in Kansas, I just couldn't find a relationship with somebody to do that sort of playing with.
Right.
And even initially moving to Madison, when I was first playing a lot of global music, we'd improvise, but it was always, sort of in style, around rhythmic material. And then when Todd came to town, that was for me like, oh, we could start doing this again. And then Mark moved to town. And so I found enough people around Madison to sort of reinvent that for myself. For me, I think this goes to me what is my favorite thing about being a percussionist is the same answer to the thing about improvisation, is that I love playing in an orchestra. I love playing contemporary chamber music. I love playing global music. I love playing Brazilian music in a bar. I love freely improvising, and percussion affords us, to do all these things if our interest in the field is to do a variety of things. Of course, we have some great artists in our field who choose to be a little more narrow, and that's amazing and great. I've always taken the sort of wide pool approach, and improvisation has always just been a part of that for me. And I think because of the nature of the instrument, it always felt really natural. So I guess maybe that's the long answer. The short answer is I love the idea of creating music spontaneously with other people and the challenges that creates.
Yeah, cool.
And with Todd for like the recordings for the Music with Tubes series, we don't talk at all. There is no conversation of, oh, you want to try this? Let's do that. We finish something, we might say, hey, that kind of felt good, or say, I didn't like that.
Yeah.
But we don't talk much about it. When you're in the studio, we got a drink of water, came back, here we go.
Yeah.
One of us makes a gesture and we start again.
Yeah. So my only real experience with improvisation is in more of a kind of a formal sense with playing in steel band and playing, taking a solo, whatever, 8, 16 with bars or whatever. And one of my own inside jokes is that I had a couple licks that I would fall back on when I would play. Like, do you ever notice that where it's like, okay, we're gonna play something and you're like, okay, that's exactly, even though it's completely free, it's completely improvised, you have the entire whatever soundscape world at your fingertips, and you kind of play the same thing that you played last time when you sat down? Like, does that ever happen? And then how do you kind of push yourself out of it?
It certainly happens to me. And I sometimes find it happens when I'm choosing instruments.
Oh yeah. Cool.
Like there's some instruments and tubes and more that I used a bunch in Don't Look Down. And I realized, oh my gosh, so I think one of the ways that I try to sort of push my way out of that is by choosing, making sure I'm, by the instrument choices.
Yeah, sure.
It's like, okay, if I fall back on this instrument regularly, and every time I have it in my hands, I tend to play this. How about if I get rid of that instrument?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I will say also, Tim, that sometimes I look at that sort of those fallbacks as not necessarily a bad thing too.
Sure.
That some of that is my repertoire. Yeah. Those are my repertoire of ideas. And in reality, I'm not sure how much in our world is new any longer in any field.
Yeah.
We've been around long enough, we've explored enough, we've shared enough.
Yeah.
That I don't mind having some things that are sort of, oh yeah, that's Tony, because I've heard him play that. I certainly want to avoid the bag of tricks, and here's the bag, and this is the lick that always comes out after this one. So yeah, I know exactly of what you speak, and I totally find myself having to work against that.
Well, I mean, and that's what I would fall into, because I could feel it on the inside, but then I really knew what was happening when we'd play in a combo, and the guitar player, we got done with a piece, and we were about to start a piece, I think, and the guitar player was like, "Oh, I can't wait to hear Tim's lick when he's, the same lick he plays on this piece. I can't wait for him to play that when we get to the solo." And that, which I guess was a compliment in a sense, but I was like, "Oh wow, it's that predictable." But I took, just moving back a bit, like as far as there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, I totally get what you're saying, that, and then kind of having your repertoire, I think, is an interesting way to look at it. Like, it may be an improvisatory setting, but you kind of have your tools, I guess, in your toolkit,
Right.
and something to kind of build or work off of. So
yeah, I'm not even fully convinced any longer after all these years. In the last year, have I played anything that was absolutely made me go, wow, I've never thought of that before.
Yeah, sure.
And, we keep searching for those, and hopefully I'll keep finding them. But, again, like you're right. It's hard. And we do develop a bag. Yeah. But I think, anyway.
Yeah, that's cool. So last question, and this one might be out of nowhere, but I do sometimes like to ask people if you could go back in time, either like Terminator style or Hot Tub Time Machine style or whatever, and tell your younger self one or two things, what might that be? Like, what might you want to tell your younger self, if there was anything? Or if there's nothing, then you don't have to say anything. We'll call it a wrap.
Yeah, no, I think I could tell myself an awful lot of things.
Yeah, maybe that's the danger, where you got to limit yourself.
Right. Yeah, I think musically, at least, framing in this conversation.
Yeah.
The two things I would have said to myself in my undergrad that I find myself telling my students now, and very often, and I'll say, hey, listen, I didn't do this at your age. And
yeah, sure.
This is, and I think you'll find it important if you do. I think you'll find it valuable.
Yeah.
One is is really not foregoing the foundational technique in our practicing for the musical ideas. For me, musical ideas have always come somewhat naturally. I felt like I always had ideas, but I didn't always in my younger days do all the technical work I needed to be able to realize those ideas at their most sort of mature and finished way.
Sure.
I had to come back. I spent the first couple of years, or the first semester or two of my master's degree, reinventing my snare drum technique with Mike Udow.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't done that enough in my undergrad.
Yeah.
So that one, and then the other one I'd say, and both these are very pedagogical, is pay more attention in theory class and singing and sight singing and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
That sometimes as an undergrad, we think, oh, this isn't that important.
Yeah.
And we want everybody to practice and do all of that. But,
yeah.
Those are some things that as I got farther removed from those years, I'm like, I would have benefited had my head been a little bit more in the right place.
Yeah. Sort of the ear training and sight singing. If anybody ever asked me this question, that would probably be up there also, because I've shared this story with Allison Shaw once or twice, but when I was auditioning for grad schools, she was teaching at Michigan State at the time, and I auditioned for her, and she nailed me, man. Like, she was looking at my grades and noticed, all my grades were kind of doing well except for ear training and sight singing, and she's like, well, why is that? And I'm like, well, the obvious. I think at the time I didn't think it was important, or I'm a percussionist, I'm not a vocalist, or I'm not a wind player. And she called me out on it big time. And then it was also during the timpani part of the audition, where obviously I was struggling with finding pitches and using kind of ratchet style pedals that I wasn't used to, and basically sweating and struggling, and she took the opportunity to let me know. So,
and Allison has such a great ear.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And she's so I can totally, she's going to hear it immediately, of course.
She didn't let it go either, and we've laughed about it. I've talked to her about it, years. That was in 98 or whatever, 97, 98, and we've talked about it a couple times since then, and she didn't remember, but I reminded her lovingly, reminded her.
Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, she, with a small comment in audition, she said something that really made you think, wow, I really need to, that's something I've got to address. And, something she didn't even remember as the sort of teacher in that setting.
Yeah. Yep.
But,
okay. So before we hang up, is there anything, like, basically, how can people find you? I mean, I'll put some of your details in our show notes, but where can people find you and listen to your music, or what you got going on?
Yeah, my YouTube channel, it's a YouTube channel that's mine and the UW-Madison percussion programs. We've got, over like 70 videos on that channel. The channel is just A. Di Sanza.
Right.
Or if you search my name or search UW-Madison percussion, you'll find that. We also, I have a Facebook page that I'm not super active on, but the Percussion Studio, I keep a Percussion Studio Facebook page, which is a little bit more active.
Cool.
And then also my personal website, anthonydisanza.com, which I do keep up pretty well. And there's just basic information there, as well as compositions, products like the triangle trigger, connections to Black Swamp, as well as the mallets with Encore. And then through the institution, through UW School of Music as well. Those are sort of my primary outlets right now. And then, people interested in CDs and such, through any of the online Barnes & Noble, CD Universe, CD Baby, any of the usual places we might purchase, music like that.
Right.
Almost anything I've done in the past that was originally released only in hard copy are now also available in those settings through download.
Great.
So.
Well, thanks, Tony. You mentioned the triangle trigger. We will do a shout out for that. Like, obviously a great product, and we had, Eric kind of worked with you largely on developing that and getting it released. So, everybody check out the Di Sanza triangle trigger at blackswamp.com. Search that or on our YouTube channel. So, but otherwise, thanks. I appreciate you taking the time. And you've, like we mentioned earlier in the podcast, you've had a long standing relationship with Eric and with Black Swamp Percussion. So thanks so much for the support, and hopefully we'll see each other in person again soon. But
and thank you, Tim, and also thank you to Eric and Black Swamp for years and years of support. I'm so appreciative of it, and also supporting the students here on campus. It's a relationship I greatly value, and I really appreciate the chance to get to chat with you today. We didn't get to do it face to face. At least this is better than on a phone.
And that's how I've done it in the past, is over phone. But since the summer, and like everyone else in the world figuring out how Zoom worked, it's been cool to actually look at people and have a conversation. It definitely makes a difference. So thanks, man.
Right.
And good luck with all your projects.
Thanks, you too. We'll talk soon.
Yep. Take care. This has been a BSP production, recorded and produced out of the Black Swamp Percussion facilities in Zeeland, Michigan. Audio and production assistance by Nathan Coles, intro and outro music by Adam Hopper, and music sprinkled throughout the episode featured performances by Tony with the Union Duo, as well as his project Curry, Hetzler, and Di Sanza.